I was blissfully oblivious to the impending storm in the chaos of my perfectly normal life. My name is Marcus, and my wife, Emma, a lively 28-year-old who could brighten every space she walked into, used to be the center of my life. I was never the social butterfly and preferred the privacy of my computer and devices over interacting with others. Thus, our journey started 8 years ago at a get-together of common friends. But as luck would have it, Emma completely upended my universe that night. I recall clumsily standing close to the snack table, calculating how many more minutes it would take me to go in a dignified manner. That is, until Emma entered. Her lively, captivating, and contagious laughter made her presence feel like a natural force. She drew everyone into her orbit as she moved through the crowd with the elegance of a star. Then we came into contact. She came over with a sly smile, taunting me with my efforts to blend in. She snatched up several chips and said, "Trying to become one with the wall?" Her laughter and ease cut through my restrained demeanor. We spoke for hours, and I felt seen for the first time at a social gathering. She drew me into a world I didn't know I wanted to be a part of, and it was a mystery that was both familiar and enigmatic. After exchanging phone numbers that evening, what I had assumed would be a brief relationship grew into something priceless. Within a year, we made the decision to live together, which came as naturally as breathing. Her energy filled any gaps in conversation, and my parents loved her. Normally a quiet man, my father opened up to her as though she were his own. Emma fit right in with my group of friends, especially with Sean, who has been my best buddy since high school, so it wasn't just my family. I was delighted by their instant connection. It seemed ideal. Through all the highs and lows, Sean, who was always charming, had been my pillar of support. I already knew Emma was the one, and his endorsement confirmed it. We got married amid a chorus of applause and happy tears after I proposed 3 years into our relationship. Ever the encouraging best friend, Sean assisted me in choosing the ring, which represented a future I was excited to create. It was a happy first few years of marriage. While I flourished in the tech industry, Emma followed her passion for fashion. But as the strain of her work wore her down, her once bright spark grew dimmer by the day, until she made the decision to rekindle her passion and quit. I helped us out by taking on extra tasks, since I was committed to giving us the life we had dreamed of. In the meantime, Emma found solace in Sean's visits, which increased in frequency while I was away. At first, I was appreciative that my wife had help while I was immersed in work. However, as their intimacy started to intrude on the sacredness of our house, thankfulness gradually turned into a persistent distrust. When I arrived home early one day because of a server crash, I discovered them together, Emma observing Sean with an intimacy I hadn't seen in months, and Sean repairing a cabinet. Their laughter served as a startling soundtrack to my collapsing reality, and the sight in front of me felt like a still from a film about home treachery. My confidence started to wane as a series of uncertainties and anxieties emerged, all of which pointed to a covert affair. The whispers and covert smiles between Emma and Sean overpowered the lively collaboration I had with her. With every suspicion causing a tremor I couldn't ignore, the basis of my life was crumbling, a painful reminder of the paradise I once called my life. The pieces of my shattered heart lay strewn as I made the decision to face the truth. I had no idea that the storm was only starting to rage and was about to destroy all I valued. The seemingly insignificant signals started to accumulate, each one revealing a tiny flaw in my idealized life picture. Once the person I trusted with everything, Sean, had become a regular visitor to my house while I was away at work, showing up at strange times. Emma would mention it in passing, as if it were unimportant. "Oh, Sean came by earlier." At first, I brushed it off, telling myself I was overanalyzing and that it was nothing. But eventually, my stomach began to get louder and louder until I was unable to ignore it any longer. The once comfortable visits became a consistent, dependable pattern. He would arrive right before I left, offering to assist Emma with tasks that I hadn't even accepted yet. I once arrived home early one evening due to an unforeseen technical issue, and as soon as I entered the house, I could hear laughter coming from the kitchen. They were standing next to each other. Emma was standing there with her fingers on the counter, watching Sean tighten a cabinet. It struck me like a ton of bricks, a scene that was both familiar and alien. My wife and my personal best friend were more relaxed than I could ever recall being with either of them. The uneasiness in the room was evident when they finally heard me enter. I tried to seem casual as I answered, "Wow, Sean," but there was tightness in my voice that I couldn't conceal. In an attempt to diffuse the situation, I dropped my suitcase a bit louder than required and asked, "Running a side hustle as a handyman now?" Emma chuckled, nervously, obviously uneasy. "I didn't think you'd mind," Sean remarked, looking at me as if this were a lighthearted favor. I made an effort to grin. I tried to seem casual, but something inside of me was twisted. "Since when does my best friend offer to do housework for my wife without telling me?" I asked. There was more to this than a cabinet door. It had to do with them, with how easily they worked together, a comfort I never had with either of them. In an attempt to minimize the situation, Sean remarked, "Just trying to keep the place together while you're busy killing it at work." I laughed, but it was a hollow laugh. The language was nonsensical. What brought Sean here so frequently? When I wasn't around, why did he get so engaged in our lives? The first real germ of doubt began to grow in my chest that night. However, it wasn't only the visits that began to irritate me. Emma had developed a new fascination with her phone. She began using it more frequently, sending silent texts and giggling at things she wouldn't tell me. Just the girls. She would always respond when I questioned her about it. However, I had lost my conviction. Something felt off about the way she avoided answering my queries and the tone she used. Her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter one evening while she was taking a shower. I was merely moving it to keep it from falling off the edge. Not spying, but as I looked at the screen, I noticed Sean's name flashing across it. The text began, "Haha, you're hilarious," and then it said, "I'll save the date." A beat skipped in my chest. On what date? Why was she receiving such a text from Sean? I knew I couldn't let it go, even though I told myself it didn't mean anything. The conversation felt strange, like I were missing a puzzle piece. I made an effort to ignore it, but the indicators continued to mount over the next few days. Sean seems to be aware of my late work schedule. He would arrive at our place in less than an hour if I brought it up in a group text. What about Emma? It was welcomed by her. She appeared excited to see him rather than merely putting up with his visits. I realized then that something was going on between them, and I had no idea what it was. I then made the decision to give it a try one evening. I leaned in casually as Emma, as usual, was absorbed in her phone while she was relaxing on the couch. I needed to know, but I didn't want to accuse her directly. "We haven't done a game night in forever. What do you think about this weekend? We can all hang out, maybe make nachos or something." She raised her head, hesitated, and finally shrugged. She stated, "I believe Sean is quite busy this weekend." I wasn't pleased with her reaction. I had not been informed that he was occupied. I texted Sean, as any inquisitive husband would do. "Yo, man. Thinking of doing a game night this weekend. You in?" After waiting for a minute, he eventually responded, "Yeah, man, let's do it." Been meaning to catch up. I had a weird feeling of triumph. Emma's expression when I informed her that Sean was free said it all. So much for him being busy. She wasn't excited, and it was clear that there was uneasiness in the air. I kept a careful eye on it that weekend. Emma was more reserved than usual and hardly spoke. Sean appeared strange as well, his typical charisma muted. They exchanged those discreet, nuanced glances that said a lot without using words. I sensed it. Now I was the stranger. They lived in a world where I was merely an afterthought, and no longer felt like I belonged. I questioned Sean about his job in the middle of the night. Just light talk. Emma interrupted him before he could respond, saying, "Oh, he's been killing it lately. Super busy with that new project." The way she spoke on his behalf made it seem as though she knew everything and was the one who had the opportunity to share his life with everyone. Sean threw her a glance that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the customary cordial look. It sounded almost like an order to stop talking. I became aware of my ignorance at that point. The extent of their concealment. I had been seeing these inconsistencies for months, and now I was about to find out what was really going on. However, I wasn't certain if I was prepared for it. The days after that weekend passed quickly. A knot in my stomach tightened each time I glanced at Emma. There were no ferocious arguments or outbursts, only a persistent, nagging feeling of dread that I couldn't get rid of. It felt frigid, like though I no longer belonged in the house that had previously been filled with the warmth of our shared memories. I kept telling myself that I was just overanalyzing things and becoming worried. I wanted to think that everything was fine, that Sean and Emma were just good friends, and that I was just dreaming. But I knew the truth in my heart. For too long, I had been rejecting it. It was more than simply friendship based on the way they looked at one another and how Emma brightened when Sean arrived. It was palpable in my bones. Then, one night, something occurred that caused everything to fall apart. It was one of those quiet nights when everything appears to be at peace on the outside, but is hollow on the inside. Emma's phone buzzed on the counter while I was working on some emails on the couch. She frequently received messages, but this time I was unable to ignore them. It felt different, urgent, perhaps, the way it vibrated on the surface. I made an effort to concentrate on my task, but my gaze kept going to her phone. I couldn't help it. Even though I told myself I had no right to spy, I made almost uncontrollable movements with my fingertips. I convinced myself that it was only to move the phone and prevent it from falling, but when I picked it up, I noticed that Sean had sent me a message. It was one of those texts that said, "I'll see you soon." When it said, "Looking forward to later," my heart fell. For a brief minute, I sat motionless, gazing at the screen as if it were a piece of evidence I wasn't prepared to face. I remained silent for a while. The damage was already done when I replaced the phone. I'd seen enough. I had always been correct. The world I had been living in was a meticulously crafted deception. There was more to Sean and Emma than just a tight friendship, and I didn't participate in it. I was the idiot who had put my trust in both of them, the one left in the dark. I didn't get much sleep that night. The pictures of them together kept coming back to me as I tossed and turned. I grew more irate the more I considered it. Every tiny element and piece of the puzzle that had come together was constantly playing over in my head. Why hadn't I noticed it earlier? What had caused my blindness? I made the decision the following day that I could not wait any longer. I needed to face Emma. I required clarification. I have to stop allowing this to fester inside of me. She was scrolling through her phone on the couch when I entered the living room. The tension in the air was palpable to me. We were both terrified to break the wall of quiet that had grown between us. "Emma," I said in a composed yet forceful tone. "We need to talk." Her eyes widened a little when she raised her head from her phone. She was aware. She also sensed it. The act of faking was over. "What is it?" she said in a somewhat too informal tone. "Too much practice." With my heart thumping in my chest, I inhaled deeply. "It's about you and Sean. I know what's going on between you two." Despite her pallid look, she remained silent. She didn't dispute it. I learned all I needed to know from that stillness. There was something cold, even calculating, in her gaze, yet I could also sense the shame. I didn't hold off till she answered. I tried to be calm, but my voice broke as I questioned, "How long? How long has this been going on?" She parted her lips, but initially nothing came out. She finally let out a sigh and turned to face her hands. "It's not what you think, Marcus." It sounded more like a joke, but I nearly laughed. "Not what I think?" "Emma, I saw the messages. I know you've been seeing him behind my back." Her lips quivered as she shook her head. "It's complicated. We didn't mean for it to happen. We didn't plan this." I stepped forward, feeling more irritated. The weight of betrayal struck me once more. "So, you're telling me that everything that's been happening was an accident? You think I'm that stupid? Do you think I don't know what this is? You and Sean, you've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me for months." Emma's eyes filled with tears, yet her speech was devoid of regret. No true regret. "Marcus, I didn't know what else to do. Sean and I, were just trying to help each other. We've been there for each other through so much." "Help each other?" I said again, raising my voice. "You've been helping each other right into my bed, into my life. I trusted both of you. I thought you were my family. And this is how you repay me?" She didn't respond. She was unable to. It was oppressive to be silent with each other. I felt as though the weight of her betrayal was drowning me. I uttered, "I don't know who you are anymore," in a voice that was hardly audible. You've destroyed everything. You and Sean, everything we built. It's gone. With anger and heartache hard in my chest, I turned to go. But I was interrupted by Emma's voice. Her voice was trembling as she pleaded, Marcus, please, don't do this. We can fix this. We can work through it. I'll stop seeing him. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't even turn to face her, I just shook my head. No, it's over. It's too late for that. You've made your choice, Emma. And it wasn't me. Like the last chapter of a pre-written tale, the door slammed behind me as I walked out of the house. My entire world fell apart. My marriage had ended, and the sour taste of betrayal was all that remained of me. It felt like I was wandering through a fog in the days after my departure from home. I had no idea what I was doing or where I was heading. I felt as though someone had reached inside of me and extracted all of the meaning and warmth, leaving me numb. Emma, my best friend Sean, and a life I believed to be unbreakable were all things I had once. I had nothing now. Just to get away, I stayed at a tiny apartment that I discovered at the last minute. It wasn't much, just blank space and barren walls, but it was mine. And I was able to breathe in my own house without feeling like I was suffocating for the first time in a long time. I buried myself in tasks and worked nonstop, attempting to make sense of what had recently transpired. However, I couldn't get the pictures and thoughts of Emma and Sean together out of my head. They followed me everywhere like shadows. I spent some time in a daze. I experienced waves of anguish, often during the night when the silence was too loud. I would mentally relive everything, again asking myself whether there was anything I had overlooked that would have served as a warning. However, the reality was that I hadn't been blind. I had simply decided to have faith, and there was no longer any confidence. Only after receiving a call from Emma did I begin to gather my thoughts. I hadn't picked up when she called a couple of times. I was unable to. After everything, I didn't want to hear her voice. However, something inside of me exploded this time. I needed the whole narrative. She had to tell it to me directly. The familiar chime of the phone broke the silence as I took it up. Marcus, please, she begged in a tremulous voice. Can we talk? I I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but we need to talk. I took a while to respond. Between the anguish of what she had done and the need for closure, my mind was a battleground. At last, I spoke in a quiet, controlled tone. What do you want to talk about, Emma? You've already made your choice. There's nothing left to say, she persisted. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I can't undo what's been done, but I need you to know it wasn't planned. It just happened. I never meant to hurt you. A harsh laugh escaped my throat as I mocked. You didn't mean to hurt me? Really? Because it sure looks like you meant everything. You've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and now you want to act like it wasn't intentional? Before she spoke again, there was silence on the other end of the telephone. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I never wanted to lose you, Marcus. Please, please, don't walk away from me, from us. A strange, icy clarity was developing in me now, but the anguish was still there, raw and sharp. You've already lost me, Emma. You and Sean, you've made your bed, and now you get to lie in it. I don't have anything left to give, she added. I can't do this without you. And for a moment, her voice carried genuine desperation. Please don't leave me. The please was what irritated me. Didn't it always do that? However, it didn't work this time. I refused to fall for it once more. You left me the moment you chose him over me. This isn't something I can fix. It's too broken. Marcus, she replied, nearly whispering. I never meant for it to go this far. I was lonely. The phrase lonely struck me hard. She dared to claim that as an excuse. Lonely? You think I wasn't working my ass off for us? For this marriage? You think I didn't sacrifice everything to make sure we were okay? I was so furious that I was having trouble breathing. You weren't lonely. You were selfish. And Sean, he knew what he was doing the entire time. Don't try to make him out to be some kind of victim. You both betrayed me. On the other end of the line, I could hear her sobbing. A brief feeling of sympathy was twisted within me, but it was swiftly replaced by the brutal, icy reality. I can't fix this. I don't want to fix this. The dial tone buzzed in my ear as I hung up the phone. I just stood there for a while, my hands trembling. It was done. As soon as I realized what they were doing behind my back, it was over. Even so, it still ached to hear her sob over the phone. It still made a deep cut. I wasn't prepared for forgiveness. I wasn't prepared to let go. But I was aware that something needed to shift. I had to regain control over my life. I had allowed Emma and Sean to control me for far too long, allowing their treachery to determine my emotions. No more. I began the process of severing connections throughout the course of the following few days. I needed distance. Not just wanted it, I knew there was no going back, so I filed for divorce. It wasn't simple. Indeed, it seemed as though a piece of me was dying along with it. However, I had to. I had to cut the final link to the life I had known for my own mental health. However, it wasn't all. My anger increased as I continued to reflect on what had transpired. Emma wasn't the only one involved. Sean wasn't the only one involved. It was about everything they had taken away from me, including my family, companionship, and trust. I wouldn't allow them to leave without repercussions. There was one more card for me to play. I was aware that Sean had always taken great delight in his impeccable reputation. Skeletons that could destroy him were in his closet. Furthermore, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. So I took the necessary action. I delved further, searching through old emails and documents, tracking down every dubious transaction, every instance in which he had broken the law, and every instance in which he had gone too far. I then forwarded everything to his supervisor, each and every detail, every shadowy area of his history. The fallout was swift. Sean lost his job a week later. The golden boy, who had previously been untouchable, was now frantically trying to locate a new source of income. For me, that was insufficient. I wanted him to experience every ounce of my pain and betrayal. Then, there was Emma. She also had no intention of running away. I began by taking care of the little things, including terminating subscriptions, preventing her from accessing our shared accounts, and ensuring she could no longer rely on me. It was a strangely pleasant feeling. It was about taking back control, not about getting even. However, there was still a final puzzle piece to solve. My folks. I had been passed over in favor of Emma and Sean. They had excused his behavior and justified hers. In their own way, they had also deceived me. So I interrupted them. No more funding. No more assisting them. Did they wish to join them? All right. Allow them to deal with the fallout from their decisions. And I gave them nothing when they scurried back and demanded money. I let them fester in their own muck. It was no longer going to be fixed by me. The ensuing months were peculiar. A part of me had anticipated relief. I thought I would find tranquility after everything had subsided and I had cut off all the connections that had kept me in that poisonous environment. However, there was no peace. Not immediately. Rather, it was a silent, void sensation. I felt as if I was drifting through existence, cut off from everyone and everything I used to know. I remained in the tiny flat, which was mine at least, but it hardly seemed like home. The space was no longer the main concern. The things weren't the point. Without Emma, without Sean, without that life that had felt so safe, I had to relearn how to be myself. I was so deeply affected by the betrayal that I no longer knew who I was, above and beyond the grief and rage. I kept my mind busy, worked long hours, and poured myself into tasks. I didn't give them any direct thought. However, it seemed like a new wound each time I saw something that brought back memories of what I had lost. The location where Sean and I used to go for drinks, an old photo on the wall, and a song that used to remind me of her. Everything hurt. However, it began to wane with time. I slowly, almost imperceptibly, started to put myself back together. I increased my time at the gym, engaged in activities I like, and even took up some new pastimes. People who didn't know me as Emma's husband or Sean's best friend began to approach me. They weren't burdened by my history, and I felt as though I could breathe without that huge weight on my chest for the first time in a long time. About 6 months after things broke apart, I ended up sitting across from a woman I hardly knew at a coffee shop one evening. We had met through a mutual friend, and her name was Rachel. She had a grounded energy that made it feel like I could just exist without trying too hard. And she was polite and easy to chat with. She didn't inquire about my history. The shattered parts of my existence didn't matter to her. She simply liked me just the way I was. It felt odd, but good, to be recognized once more for who I was, not for my flaws or my hurt. And something changed in me as we chatted and laughed over coffee that evening. Not yet. It wasn't love. However, it was the first time I had ever felt as though I might be able to move on. I might be able to construct something new. I was finally prepared to leave my past behind, not because I was avoiding it. I saw Rachel occasionally throughout the course of the following few weeks, never pressuring our connection and allowing it to develop organically. Sometimes I couldn't help but compare her to Emma, even though I didn't want to. Although my feelings for Rachel were different from those I had previously experienced for Emma, they were nonetheless genuine and mine. I felt hopeful for the first time in a long time. Naturally, though, the world had other ideas just as I felt like I might be moving on from the past. On an arbitrary morning, my mother sent me a straightforward message that said, "We need to talk." Since cutting my parents off, I hadn't spoken to them. I had assumed that they would ultimately acknowledge their error and stop bothering me. However, no. They arrived at my door that day. My dad, who appeared exhausted and defeated, as if life had caught up with him. My mom, whose eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Nate," my mother began, her voice wavering, "we know we messed up. We should have been there for you. Please, can we talk?" I remained there for a while, feeling as though the rage I had suppressed could come back to haunt me. They wanted to be forgiven for picking Emma and Sean over me. It was difficult to avoid seeing them as the same individuals who had chosen allegiance to the very persons who had deceived me and attempted to defend what had transpired. With a cold voice, I questioned, "Why are you here, Nate?" my father said. "We weren't thinking." "We were wrong. Your mom. She came to us, and we didn't know what to say. We didn't want to lose you too. You lost me the moment you chose them," I replied. I was surprised at how readily the sentences flowed out. "You defended them when you should have defended me." A protracted stillness filled with remorse and lost chances prevailed. My mom wiped her eyes again, and my dad looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "You're right," my mother said in a whisper. "We've failed you. You want me to forgive you?" I said, letting out a sour laugh as I looked at them with the weight of everything they had done bearing down on me. "How do you expect me to just forget everything? You chose them over me, and now you come here asking me to fix things?" My dad said softly, "We don't expect forgiveness, Nate, but we want to make things right." I was struck by the words, but they fell flat. I had had enough of attempting to mend fences with those who failed to support me when I needed them most. I was no longer angry, at least not in the same sense. I was simply finished. "I've already made my choice," I responded in a level voice. "I'm moving forward, and I don't need anyone from my past holding me back." I didn't hear from them again after they left. I was not relieved. There was no sense of closure for me. I had no feelings. Officially, that chapter of my life was over. I would never be able to return to that chapter. After several weeks, I came to the realization that I was at last free, released from the bonds that had bound me for so long, released from the pain and the guilt. I also stopped glancing behind me for the first time. I wasn't dwelling on the hypothetical or questioning whether I ought to have taken a different action. For the first time, I was living for myself. Rachel and I kept seeing each other, leisurely but not hurried. I wasn't searching for an easy solution. I was whole without anyone else. After everything I had experienced, I was entire once more. I noticed that I was thinking about the past less and less as time passed. The sorrow and the betrayal were still there, but they no longer characterized who I was. The man who had been devastated by Emma's treachery wasn't me. I wasn't the person whose entire world had fallen apart due to Sean's deception. I was a new person who had survived the worst life, had to offer, and emerged from it stronger, wiser, and more conscious of my true needs. Ultimately, I came to the realization that sometimes the best kind of retaliation isn't making other people pay. Rather, it's reclaiming your life and creating a better future than you ever had. For the first time in a long time, I'm not scared of the future, even if I'm not sure where Rachel and I will go. All I ever needed was tranquility, which I've found. It's time to move on from the past and begin living a new life.